Hey all y'all, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carrie. What am I doing with all my hands here? Anyway, today I'm doing another video on knitting in the round, and we're going to talk about knitting stripes. Specifically, going to talk about avoiding the dreaded jog. When we knit in the round, stop me if you've heard this, we do not knit in a circle. We actually knit a spiral when we knit a tube. And the upshot of that is the first stitch of a round and the last stitch of the round don't actually sit next to each other evenly. The last stitch sits just a little bit higher up in that spiral than the first stitch. If you're knitting just one color, that little jog, not noticeable. No one's ever gonna see it. But if you change colors, you get something that looks like this. This is what the jog looks like, and you can see this dark blue stitch sits up just a little bit higher than the light blue stitch. And if all we do is change yarn, there's nothing that's going to disguise that jog. It will always stand out like a sore thumb. So I am going to share with you 2 ways that you can avoid the jog, and you can decide for yourself which techniques that you prefer and under which circumstances. So hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, give this video a thumbs up, and let's knit. Before we get into today's video, as always, I want to remind you that down in the description box, you will find timestamps to different parts of the video. As always, I hope that you'll watch the video all the way through at least once, because you never know what neat little tip or trick or funny little bit you might find. But life is happening, and sometimes you just got to get to the goods. Also down in the description box, you will find a list of materials that I utilized in today's video, plus maybe some additional recommendations. And these will be marked as affiliate links. What is an affiliate link? Well, it's just a link to a place where you can do some shopping, and if you make a purchase on that site, I might then earn a small commission, and that helps support my channel and growing this community. My mission is to spread the joy and love of crafting, so if you utilize one of my affiliate links, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it. And if you don't, that's cool too. I'm just happy you're here watching a video. The techniques to avoid this jog, specifically in knitting stripes, is all about basically taking this first stitch of the round and pulling it up even with this last stitch of the round. But this first method I'm going to show, I think of as the pull-up method. I don't know if this is what's called. It's what I call it. And to get it started is very simple. You just join in the new color of yarn. And all I'm going to do for my first round is just knit in the new color. Put that on the floor. Gotta put the yarn on the floor. It really does make a difference. Putting the yarn on the floor really does make a difference in yarn management. All right, so we're back here to the beginning of the round. Now, here is where if I did nothing and I just knitted my next round, I would get the jog. What I'm going to do, and it's going to look a little unusual, but I'm going to take my right needle and I'm going to insert it from the back to the front into the stitch on the row below, thusly, okay? And I'm going to pull that stitch up onto my needle. So now my first stitch of the round here and my stitch from the row below here is sitting to the right of it. They're both up on my needle, and I'm now going to knit those 2 stitches together. And now I'm going to just continue knitting around my next round. But let's jump back and take one more look at this. So I take my needle and I insert it from front to back into the stitch on the row below. then lift that stitch up onto my left needle, then I knit 2 together. So I'm going to continue knitting around, and I'm going to knit around and just enjoy some nice relaxing knitting. Okay, I've gotten to the end of this 5th round, so we are here. And things are going to be a little loosey-goosey because the fact that I have to still weave in ends. So I'm just gently pulling on the tails to tidy up where I did that color change. All right, so right here is where that color change occurred, and you can see there is no jog there, right? It's really lovely. And it will look even better once I weave in my ends and really get like the tension on this stitch here, just a little bit more even out. But here's the thing about this technique. I knitted 5 rounds for this stripe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But let's look at this column of stitches where it's the first stitch of the round. Let's count the stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's right. There is 1 less stitch in this column of stitches than all of the other columns. And that happens because when you pull up this stitch right here up to meet up with the last stitch of that round, that first blue stitch that you knitted falls behind the work. You can see, hopefully you can see, there's this little blue blip right there, and on top of it is the blue bite right there. That's the first stitch of the color change that I knitted in the dark blue, and it falls behind the light blue, and you end up with 1 stitch fewer in this first column of stitches. But if you're knitting wide enough stripes, like 5 or more rounds, you're not going to notice that that first stitch of each round has 1 fewer stitch than all of the other columns of stitches. If you're working shorter rounds, the fact that you're a stitch short in this column will be noticeable, and that's the downside of this technique. The upside of this technique, besides the fact that it's fairly easy to do and why to consider utilizing this technique, is that it doesn't change the beginning of your round. Your beginning of your round stays in the same column of stitches the entire time. The other technique that I'm going to show you, which is the traveling jog technique, does change the beginning of your round every time you do a color change, but you get stripes where all the columns of the stitches are the same number, and it's really easy to do. It's easier to do than this technique, and it's great when you're doing shorter rounds. So let's take a look at the traveling jog technique. This next technique I'm going to show, I think, is probably the one that you really see most often these days. In fact, the first technique I showed, it's the first one I actually learned, but it's the one that I find the least information about out on the intertubes. And I think it's because this next technique has really sort of become the prevalent way to avoid a jog or have a jogless stripe, and that is to use the traveling jog technique. This works really great. It creates a jogless stripe. It's really easy to do. The only real downside to it is when you utilize this technique, you change the beginning of your round at each color change. But let's just jump in and see how it's done. So I'm ready to introduce my light blue, so onto the floor with you. And we're going to do our next color change. Just like the previous technique, the first row we are just going to knit with our new color. By the way, I've been doing a whole series of videos just on knitting in the round. If you have any questions about knitting in the round, I would love to know what they are. Please let me know down in the comments down below, because I really have been concentrating on this with my videos, and I want to make sure that I'm kind of giving the tips and techniques that you're looking for to make your knitting in the round experience the most enjoyable possible. And we are back here at the beginning of the round. Let me get these threads out of the way. So how you do this technique is super, super simple. All you're gonna do is you're gonna take your right needle and slip the first stitch as if to purl. That's all you're gonna do. And by slipping that first stitch as if to purl, that's going to pull up the stitch from the row below to even it up with the last stitch of the old color. It's also going to pull up this first stitch of the new color with the last stitch of the new color. The thing about this technique that you got to remember though is that this is going to change the beginning of your round. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my needle, because I'm using magic loop, and I'm going to pull my needle through and put that stitch just back here as the new last stitch of my round. And now I'm going to just continue knitting on. Now I don't use a stitch marker when I'm knitting in the round, but if you utilize a stitch marker, what you'll want to do is you'll remove the stitch marker, slip your stitch, and move the stitch marker next to it. All right? So if you utilize a stitch marker, you're going to want to move that stitch marker after you've slipped the stitch. So however you mark your rounds, just make sure that marker is now indicating that you have a new beginning to your round. So I'm getting here to the end of this second round, and I'm coming up to my last stitch, and it's right here. That stitch is the one that I actually slipped. And it's pretty loose right now because it's actually the first stitch of the color change, so there's that tail there. I'm going to just knit into it. And I have completed the second round in this light blue color. Things in this area are a little bit loosey-goosey with the stitches and all the tails, but all of that will get sorted out once I weave in the tails later. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just knit a couple more rounds. So I knitted 3 rounds with the light blue yarn. So right here is the next color change. And look, it's going to look a little bit wonky in some ways. It's because I cut the yarn and I rejoin. I get a little bit of a hole right here. So I have to weave in my ends. And weaving in the ends, that process will perfect this color change so that it really is jogless. This technique works really well. It's really simple to do, and you can get really lovely results, but you are changing the beginning of your round. Now, if you're just doing basic bitch stripes like this, who cares? Whatever, the beginning of your round changes. It's not a big deal. But if you start doing more complex color work where you're trying to avoid jogs and you really don't want to change the beginning of your round, this may not be like your favorite option. But yeah, gotta be honest, I would say 90% of the time, 98% of the time, I would just use the traveling jog technique. So we're going to take a look at weaving in ends with jogless stripes because it really does make a difference in the end result having a good weave. The fact of the matter is when you are knitting in the round and you are joining in a new ball of yarn, whether it's stripes or just, you know, single color knitting, wherever it is akin to joining a new ball into the middle of your work, meaning that you end up with a hole wherever you change and yarn and join in a new ball, which means you need to weave in your tails in order to close up the holes and make everything look nice. But this process is especially important when you're doing stripes like this, because this is one of the things that's going to make this jogless and more perfected. By the way, I have a whole video dedicated to how to join in balls of yarn in the middle of a piece. and weave in the ends so you avoid any holes. I will link it up here and down in the description box. And I would take a look at that video for a more in-depth discussion of what I'm about to show here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start weaving in the tails from my last color change where I did the traveling jog technique. But how I'm going to weave in my tails will be exactly the same for the other jogless technique I've shown. Here are my two tails from the traveling jog technique, and it looks a little crazy, right? Because you've got this stitch here, you've got this stitch here, there's this strand of yarn. That strand of yarn is from slipping the stitch. All right, so what's going on? Well, you know, whenever you're trying to do any kind of weave like this, it's always good to just like pause and consider what it is that you want to do. And the first step is always to cross your threads, right? And the reason to cross them is I want the ends to kind of go in the direction that they would have moved in had I not changed the balls of yarn. Once I've done that, I like to start with the tail that is coming from the left or from the right and traveling to the left. I always just think that is an easier path to see because you don't have to worry about this strand of yarn, right? Because that's confusing. But still, it can be a little tricky sometimes knowing exactly where the thread path is, looking on the wrong side. So to get started, I like to turn the work over and do the first couple of duplicate stitches on the public side of the work. And I see my tail is right here. So that's my tail, and I pull it loose and I can tighten it up. And my tail, you can see, is naturally wants to go off to my right. So here is the tail of my stitch. So I'm going to go one stitch to the right and duplicate over that stitch. And again, I have a video where I talk about how to use duplicate stitch to weave in your ends. When you do this, you're duplicating the same color. So I'm doing a tail from the light blue, so I'm duplicating stitch over the light blue stitches. Because the point of this is to just weave in your tail to help get good tension. And then I kind of stop. Sometimes I have to take the tail of the other color and just pull it so that I can see that this is looking good. And that's looking good there now along here. And then I could turn my work around and continue duplicating stitches on the back of the work for as long as I wanted. It made me feel comfortable about my weave. All right. So let's take a look now. We gotta still weave in this tail. And again, this can all look very confusing right now. But again, my way of sort of dealing with that is to not look at this side and to turn my work over and go, okay, where's my tail? Here's the stitch with my tail. Whoop. So I want this tail to go off to my left because it's coming out of the left, this left leg of this stitch is my tail. So I want it to go to the left, to the next stitch. So here's the next stitch to the left. So I just go into that stitch and duplicate across. The important part about this is really matching the tension of the stitches that you're duplicating on top of. And I just do that again for 2 or 3 stitches on top. Look at everything, make sure everything looks okay. And if I'm satisfied, which I am, I think that looks like a really nice stripe now, really nice and jogless, right? I'm gonna then turn my work over and continue duplicating across. And voila. And there is my stripe at that color change where I just did the traveling jog. And you can see that by doing a nice weave and making sure the tension was really good with my weave, I have a really nice jogless stripe there. If you'd like to know more about color work techniques and everything, I would highly recommend the book, The Essential Guide to Color Knitting by Margaret Radcliffe. I don't have a hard copy of this book. This is a book that lives on my Kindle, but I really do love this book. I learned a lot about color techniques with it, not just color techniques, but color theory as well. It's just a very comprehensive book when it comes to color work and knitting. I highly, highly recommend it. There will be a link for it down in the description box, which will be an affiliate link. And if you click on that link and you make a purchase, then I may make a small commission, which helps supports my channel. And if you utilize one of these links, thank you so much. So that's it. I would love to hear from you down in the comments down below what you think of these techniques. Have you utilized any of them? What has been your experience with them? Is there a way of avoiding jogs that I didn't cover that you know about? I would love to hear about it because, as I always say, I like to think I know everything, but I really don't. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if so, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with your other knitting friends. Liking videos, sharing videos, commenting on videos helps YouTube know that this is a space worth checking out, and then it helps promote me to other knitters who may not have found this community yet. If you have not already, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss my latest video or live stream. If you'd like to follow me on social media, you can find all that down in the description box below. And I am running out of card space, so I gotta wrap this up. Again, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful day, evening, weekend, weeknight, whenever you may be watching this. And as always, happy health and happy knitting. Bye. Hey all y'all, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carrie. This is where I talk about knitting, my tips, my tricks, my opinions, and my preferences. I don't know why I've started singing. Oh, cable's showing. Come on. Why? I'm being silly. That's okay. I'm allowed to be silly. These are my videos. I get to be silly. I can be silly if I want to. I can make up words, songs. Okay, so this next cheek. La 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 la. Gotta get my tongue loosened up. We're gonna avoid the jog today. We're gonna have stripes with no jogs. That's the goal for today. Oh, real quick, at the end of the video, there will be a couple of video suggestions if you want to keep watching videos from me. If not, great. Have a wonderful day. Hit subscribe so you can easily find me again. Okay, I'm really done now. Really done.